we got Jimmy Jr. on the line, so let's bring him on. Hi, Jimmy. How are you? It says you want to talk about the idea that Egypt
great.
was really powerful for a long time is more nuanced than commonly realized.
Yeah, that's correct. Thanks for taking my call. I don't want to, kind of interrupt and take away from the other callers. I know I am a host, and you hear enough from me, Kelley. So please kick me off if I bore you to death. But
I always love hanging out with you, Jimmy.
spirit...
I always love doing nonprofits with you.
I appreciate that. Yeah, it's great. In the spirit of truth wanted, however, I think, and this is not brand new news, but I think it's something that most people probably don't really think of when they think about Egypt. And since you guys started off with questions about the pyramids, I thought, you know what, this might be a good idea to impose some truth. So the idea that Egypt has been this really powerful civilization for 3,000 to 5,000 years or so, I think growing up, that was something that we were probably all taught, right? There were thousands of years where Egypt was this monolith, this hegemon in the African continent, and there was nothing else like it, right? They had these pyramids that we couldn't understand. They had this technology that was really just unexplainable, right? Must have been aliens that built the pyramids. But I've been doing some research in this area. Specifically with Lower Egypt, or excuse me, well, what would be called Upper Egypt, because back then the Egyptians actually thought that north was south and south was north because of the direction that the Nile flowed. So Upper Egypt is actually really south of where Egypt is now, and it spills over into what we understand as Sudan. But we know that those civilizations actually started first, and Egypt really didn't become powerful until about 1500 BC. So we give it all this credit of like, hey, 3,000 years ago or 5,000 years ago, there were really sophisticated technological methods happening and sophisticated religions and culture, but that was actually all imported. Most of it was imported, and it came from the south, and it actually it came from what would be called Upper Nubia, which, of course, again, flip Africa upside down, and it's really, really far south Nubia, right? Because their understanding of the world back then was, hey, this whole thing's upside down. So what really had happened was,
Jimmy, this whole world is still upside down.
Yeah.
Well, because we're in space,
flat,
there's no preferential orientation. So if you'd rather flip the Earth the other way, hey, that's equally valid, right? No more of this northern hemisphere chauvinism,
Right, and maybe we're the wrong ones. Maybe they had it right. Maybe we came in and said, you know what, let's just rewrite this whole thing, which I'm sure happened. But this idea that Egypt's pyramids were unprecedented. Were actually, and I say new information, but probably 80 to 100 years started this excavation of the Sudan region, and we're starting to find that there were actually structures there that were imported hundreds of miles, gigantic stones that had to be brought in, and they had to be dragged or rolled in because the areas where these stones are being found, those stones were not native to that area. And so predating Egypt by like 1,000 years or so, or several thousand years, excuse me, we're talking back to like 8,000 BC. There has been uncovered these major structures, these civilizations that didn't really leave us any writing, right? So we don't know how much of their ideas actually filtered into Egypt and what allowed Egypt to become so powerful. How are we doing so far, gents? Am I boring you to death?
No. What do you think? Do you know about the city of Corral in South America?
I have heard of it. I don't have any. I can't speak intelligently to it. What's the parallel you're going to draw?
Well, the city of Corral was around at the same time that they were building the pyramids in Egypt, and they were actually building pyramids there as well. And a lot of people think like a lot of people always pseudo historians will draw parallels to the Egyptian pyramids to like the Mayans pyramids, but though they were years apart. But Corral was actually contemporary of the pyramids in Egypt. So I was wondering if you had any idea about, anything to say about that.
Well, yeah. Not only was that area having pyramid building. Not only at the same time, but prior to the pyramids of Egypt. But we see the same thing in Indonesia. There's a pyramid complex in Indonesia that is estimated to be like 20,000 years old. And so, there's really the way to kind of go about verifying that, I think, is to get inside of it. Which I don't know if there's even an entrance. I don't even know if there really is an inside. These are all kind of just theories, but we know that the outside structure is there. And so to say that the Egyptians had kind of a monopoly on this technology, while it may have been different, it was happening all around the world. And I think that's a great point that you brought up, because we see like ziggurats and things like that in different regions. We still have remains standing that either predate or exist as contemporaries to the Egyptians. But the Egyptian civilization itself, what I find extremely fascinating is that their gods, their culture, it all came together from the more southern, what we understand as southern area, right? And there were trade routes that existed around what we would now consider Yemen, leaving off the coast of Somalia. And this is just not common knowledge. When we think of Egypt, we think of like this outlier, this anomaly in African cultures. We had, and us as Westerners are kind of raised with this bias in school coming up, where the Romans were great, the Greeks were great, the Persians were maybe not so great, but they were still sophisticated. And then Africa was kind of uncivilized, but there was the Egyptians. And my counter to that is actually the Egyptians owe their success to the actual civilizations that predated them. The Nubian people, those are the, yeah.
I was just going to say on the pyramid thing earlier, because you were talking about the pyramids in South America and Central America and elsewhere, and like the conspiracy of that like they're coming from a common source or they work together. That particular conspiracy is one that's always, it's one of the more ridiculous to me, because like,
yeah,
if you're going to build a big pile of stuff, what shape is it going to take? It's going to be a pyramid, right? That is like the most
we all learned that. We all learned that like when we were 4, we're putting blocks together, right?
Yeah. So like, it's not like the pyramids were a great work of engineering for the time. And like, I don't want to downplay the difficulty and building something like that. But at like a fundamental level, the idea that two groups of humans both independently figured out, well, if I want a big pile, I'm going to make a big like stack of stuff. Like that's not, like that's just silly.
Jimmy, I once saw I once watched a pretty reputable documentary with real scientists and real archaeologists and stuff, and they were looking at groups of standing stones out in the Sahara Desert, on the eastern end of the Sahara Desert, and they were theorizing that as the Sahara was drying up, the peoples who were living in what was once the fertile grasslands of the area migrated eastwards toward the Nile River. And that was the actual beginnings of the Egyptian culture.
That's absolutely right. And so really we see that happen. So let me get back to the other gentleman. I'm sorry, sir. What was your name again?
Jordan.
My name's Jordan.
Jordan, that's right. Yeah, Jordan. Kelley was super excited to work with you. He mentioned you the other night during the Nonprofits recording. But I think that theory is actually very racist, and you'd probably agree. I think that's common knowledge. Like this idea that these African people couldn't build
these would have been African people, right? They came out of the desert. Right, and they came out of the desert and started at the upper reaches of the Nile, and then migrated down to what later became Egypt.
Yeah, I mean, nobody looks at the works of like the archaeology or the architecture of Greece or Rome or anything like that and thinks, oh, that's crazy. Must have been aliens. But as soon as like some people from Africa do it, they couldn't have possibly figured that out. They're Africans. Yeah, there's definitely a racist
Exactly,
component, for sure.
and that's where that's where I'm coming in with like this racist undertone, right? I think that just the kind of ancient European, if you will, cultures of the time really that idea kind of was birthed there and just carried forward, and kind of just like, oh, there's no way that they could have done that. So yeah, that's a disappointing kind of characterization to have. But yeah, Kelley, on your point, so they think that around 8,000 BC, between 11 and 8,000 BC, the Sahara Desert started drying up. But before that, it was actually really wrought with streams and foliage and all kinds of like fishing and more, and it was a fisherman society, right? So you don't see a lot of cows or goats or anything like that out in those areas. There's no remnants of that whatsoever. And so that's one of those things, right? Once that area started drying up, these people took they took root in closer to the Nile River, and they were actually not up in the Egyptian area first. It was more south, what we understand as south, in the Nubian area, and they were kind of dragging their culture eastward and then upward. And then these trade routes we were able to kind of determine that existed, that we really didn't have knowledge of prior. We think of the Nile River spilling into the Mediterranean, or the Mediterranean spilling into the Nile, and that being a primary trade route between civilizations. But we didn't consider that across the Sinai Peninsula and around the Horn of Africa were there other trade routes, and livestock, cattle, things from those areas found their way, and we started seeing that as people settled closer to the Nile River. That's where those skulls pop up. That's where all of that anthropology comes in. So yeah, before that, the Sahara was like a really lively place with a lot of reliance on kind of a water economy, if you will.
Mm-hmm. I know that there's rock carvings of animals out in the middle of the Sahara that show like a lot of savanna type animals, like rhinoceros, giraffes, that type of thing.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that, and it right now where there's just desert, that's where I'm talking about. They have found structures where rock was imported, where huge stones were imported, right, by these people who theoretically couldn't do that, right? But they did it. And they had civilizations that predated what we understand as the most sophisticated, far before these most sophisticated civilizations actually popped up. So anyway, I wanted to shed some truth there,
I see you're really
fascinating.
I see you're really passionate about this subject.
Yeah, well, Africa in general, I don't think gets a lot of attention historically, right? We think of them and we think of colonialism, we think of slavery, we think of kind of being behind the times, but the fact of the matter is they were exactly where they needed to be, with what they needed to do. They had what they needed to survive. They had what they needed to rely on what was around them and to work with that stuff. It was when we came in, it was when Northerners came in and saw these people that were just, I guess, they viewed as inferior. They kind of just started carving the place up. And so that message never really gets out, that we actually had these sophisticated kingdoms, and they predated some of the more
they did this. They did the same thing in Africa that like we all know the history of the Mayas and the Incas here in the United States, but we don't know the Songhai Empire, the Mali Empire, Punt, Zimbabwe, Axum, right, Kush, right, all of those things, and those were all just destroyed, as you said, through colonialism.
Yeah,
well,
yeah, that's right. That's right. And
go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, that's fine. I just wanted to. I kind of just wanted to posit that on you. I got really excited when you started talking about pyramids, and I said, you know what? Maybe I'll just call and see if they want to hear from me. So, but I don't know.
Roman Empire.
Well, I appreciate you calling in, Jimmy. I really do. All right, I'm going to let you go now, though. If that's okay with you. So I will see you.
Thanks for hearing me out. You have a good night.
Yeah, you too. That was awesome.